Hi, welcome to another episode of Coffee with Karim. I'm still not on coffee, folks. I love it. I start the show in Ramadan, mashallah, and I'm not having coffee during the podcast called Coffee with Karim. But in due time, hopefully there'll be a lot more barakah as a result. So what I wanted to get into today was actually share... I was working on a piece back in the day called Questions My Imam Could Never Answer. And I was like putting it together into like this little booklet. Because I think a lot of Muslims and religious people at large, they probably have felt this at some point in their life, in their communities. Whether it's like Sunday school or this school or that school, it's like you weren't allowed to ask questions sometimes, right? Like, well, don't ask that. What do you mean by that? What do you mean this and that? And it's like blasphemous. So people start to, get shy and not ask questions. And then what happens is religion now is associated with a lack of cognitive complexity, a lack of free thinking and inquiry and all this stuff, which is really untrue when you look at the history of religion. And what kind of amazing thinkers and philosophers religion also produced. I mean, it's not like everyone was a complete dud out there. I mean, you have St. Thomas Aquinas in the Christian tradition. You have Maimonides in the Jewish tradition. You have, Al-Ghazali and other scholars of all different faiths. And you just find there's a lot of impeccable intellects out there who did associate with a religious tradition, and their practice of religion didn't hinder them. Bringing it back to one of my memories, and hopefully provide some lessons. So, it was a very hot New England summer in Ramadan several years back, and I at the time was teaching at an Islamic private school in the very community that I grew up in. And every year, like most masjids, we had two esteemed guests come from overseas, and in particular we had some guests from Egypt, a very well-known senior scholar and his student. And I remember the scholar was very busy making his Ramadan rounds at the different Muslim centers in the state and so on and so forth. Yet his student, he was like staying in like the masjid quarters, and we would frequently like chat and hang out, and he was wicked cool. He was like a kind family man. He was like training to become a scholar, and I felt honored to, be at his service, and I did my best to make him feel at home, and he showed enthusiasm to learn about American Muslims and the local struggles. And me having the background in psychology and being a teacher at the Islamic school, I would share with him ideas and experiences, and he had a very open heart, and he was very inquisitive. I had a few important questions that I wished to discuss, and I asked him, and he said, honestly, it's best you probably ask the big boss, the scholar Imam. So two of those questions I still remember today. Well, the first question I had was, is it permissible for a Muslim to work for the U.S. military in defense? And at that time, it was under the Bush administration. Providing the political attitude towards Muslims and the moral implications for Muslims, I was genuinely interested in that question, and I had a couple of buddies who were working in the industry. The other question I had was more theological, a bit controversial. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most merciful, then why do people go to hell forever? That was a question I had. Now, fast forwarding to what actually happened. So, as you know, I was teaching at the Islamic school, and there's a masjid on the same property. So after the day was over, it's like 3:30, 4 p.m. or whatever. We usually go up and pray Asr. But once I got into the prayer hall, I saw both the big boss scholar and his student, my friend, in the congregation. So after prayer, the student called me over to where they were. And in the circle, two of the guys were actually fathers of my students. And so I was very excited because the student was such a gem. We established such a lovely relationship at this point. And I couldn't wait to be struck by the enlightening bolt that would come from the scholar, the guy who's actually teaching him. I'm like, man, he must be like a whole other caliber of awesome. And eager to embrace the eloquence of his wisdom, the scholar looked at me, he asked my name, I was like, my name is Karim. And this was the dialogue that happened. Okay? So the scholar said, hey, you're a teacher in the Islamic school, right? I said, yes, I am, smiling and, quite proud. And then he said, then why are you wearing this? And he's pointing at a leather necklace with a turquoise stone that I happen to be wearing. I was like, huh? I felt something like clench in my throat for a moment. I visualize now just this. I just felt like I wanted to crawl under the carpet. I breathed, and I became keen of the circle, especially the parents of the kids that I teach. They're kind of like, oh, this is awkward. And I said, excuse me? And my heart started to race more. And he said, why are you wearing this when you're supposed to be an example for the students? He said again without any hesitation and no additional sensitivity. I bowed my head. I remember I bowed my head and I wanted to just disappear. And the circle just felt really tight all of a sudden. And, it may not sound like a big deal to you, but come on, this is a big deal. Like, you're sitting with this big-time scholar, and he is basically humiliating you in front of other people, and specifically people that know you, and you teach their children. This is a very unfortunate scene here. And what's sad is, I felt this before, unfortunately. I have, and I've probably done it myself. I'm be honest. I'm not a perfect person. I've probably made people feel low or down before. It's this idea when you make somebody feel like a nobody out of a false sense of piety or religious pride or self-aggrandizement. I went through my own phases with the faith and what's considered like the true religion and what's the right way to practice it. And, of course, when you're young and you have more passion, you tend to make a lot more mistakes, when it comes to your character and your approach to people. So I definitely had learned a lot of lessons from my own mistakes. And I definitely realized that was one of the things I didn't like about, some of these groups or people that approached other Muslims in this way. And so it was just like a real brick in the face to be sitting with somebody who's supposed to be this authority of knowledge, and then you're getting it dished out to you from somebody who should know better. But that day I wasn't going to roll over and be polluted with his plastic questions. So I actually spoke up. I looked up and I calmly asked the sheikh. I said, Sheikh, why are you wearing that? And I pointed at his hat. He had this tall red cap that he was wearing. And the circle of brothers at this point, they just quivered with this unspoken tension. And he smiled to me, the sheikh smiled to me, and he said, this is not imitation of women, like the ornament of a necklace. So I felt even more hurt. Now the guy's basically saying I'm imitating women. My God, you just did not go there. But he did. And, I've had facial hair and a beard 90% of my life. So clearly I wasn't imitating women by not having a beard and wearing earrings and whatnot. It's just the whole premise is ridiculous. And I said, well, Sheikh, your hat is an ornament for men, which is culturally accepted in Egypt, as this necklace is in America. And it does not entail in our Muslim community that I am any less of a man nor imitating women. I love my students, and I serve them for that reason. And I scratched my beard chin, I remember, and my heart was soaring, because of course I was doing the unquestionable, questioning the big sheikh, the big boss, and basically not taking his dirt. And he formed a face of discontent, as if I, the nobody, failed to realize I was a nobody. He did not bother addressing any of my actual questions that his student brought to him. And on top of that, he let me know that I did not have any Islamic costume in order. I wasn't dressed the part, so to speak. And it's almost as if because of the way I was dressed, I was wearing normal clothes, like a polo shirt or a dress up and khakis or jeans, but I happened to have this necklace, which wasn't even jewelry, in the sense. So then his student interrupts, and he's like, Sheikh, we have another appointment. And he basically stopped it, and they got up and left. So he's like, pardon me, I have to go, and blah, blah, blah. So the big boss leaves with the student, and I was just wow. I was so embarrassed and so humiliated. And no matter how much I tried to rationalize, it was clear that there was a lack of courtesy and wisdom on his part. And probably mine too, but come on, you're supposed to be this big boss sheikh who's touring the state with all your prestigious knowledge, and for the first time you meet somebody who is a teacher as well, like you, for Muslim students, he's a friend of your student, right? And that's what you say, like the first thing you say to me. I was just floored. I mean, I still am. And yes, I am a nobody. You know what? I accept that. I am a nobody. In context of Allah, I am a nobody. I'm impoverished. I'm petty. And I'm going to fizz out in no time compared to the divine face. I accept that. That does not mean you need to make me feel like a nobody, because God gave me a chance to be somebody by giving me the priceless gift of life. I'm here. So that means God wanted me here. And He wanted all of us here. And that's why we all have to have honor and dignity for humans. The silver lining of that was the parents actually came up to me after, and they gave me a hug, and they were like, "Hey, listen, he doesn't know like what life is like here. Don't let him put you down. Don't feel judged by that." It was very nice to hear that from the two dads that were there, and it was a great lesson for me, in a lot of ways. And I think everyone who's listening should take from this. And the lessons are many, right? Number one, have courtesy when you meet people. Have character. Because for God's sake, that is ultimately the core of who you are and the core of all experiences. I don't care how nice your Islamic costumes are, or your religious garbs, or whatever it is. In the end of the day, if you don't know how to talk to somebody, you don't know how to treat somebody with dignity and integrity and respect, then you might as well take the hat off, take the hijab off, shave your beard. Okay? Now, sure, ideally, we want to have the inner and the outer reflecting the divine reality. Okay? I'm not like against people who wear, sunnah clothes or hijab or anything like that. But what I am saying is, I think that the Muslim community struggles a lot with, this idea of we focus heavily on appearing religious and looking religious. In other words, the social repertoire aspect of it. And that sometimes when the emphasis is placed on that, then we actually forget about really cultivating the deeper character of the person. So that's why you get all these people who look religious on the outside, but the way they act is contrary to all the character traits of what a true believer or pious person would actually be. So that's one reminder for us as a community. The second thing is, hey, people that are authorities or scholars, they're just humans too. And they make mistakes. And guess what? They also don't always have the answers. And oftentimes people, think that every time they have a question or they're confused about something, they have to go find it outside of themselves. Well, guess what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, "Attaqullah yu'allimukum Allah." If you have consciousness of the divine will teach you directly. You'll actually get knowledge and insights and inspirations. Okay? So you don't need to always find salvation and completion and guidance in those outside of you, including these scholars. All right? Scholars are just people too. And I've actually counseled and provided counseling for imams that lead prayers, that have their heads of masjids and blah, 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 and they've got all kinds of human struggles going on behind the scenes. Okay? So they're just people like you and me. And we shouldn't put anybody on a pedestal. All right? Now, granted, there are real enlightened scholars and teachers out there. I believe that. I believe I've met them. And I do consult with them. And I have teachers that I go to for advice and ask questions, for sure. I'm not like against all scholars or authoritative religious figures. I'm not. But I think that when it's over politicized and over, commodified, and there's all this celebrity status, stuff going on, it just takes away from like the essence of it for me. All right? And I think that some of the ways to know if it's a real teacher is, number one, real scholars don't talk at you. They don't talk down to you. They speak with you as a human being. And they certainly don't make you feel like you're just a nobody. In fact, it's the opposite. They make you feel like you are a somebody. And that was the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He used to make all the Sahaba feel special, to the extent that each Sahabi believed they were the most favored by Allah's Messenger. I mean, just amazing. It's also very important to distinguish, a real scholar in the sense of, are you impressed with what they're saying? And I don't mean like, are they charismatic speakers and, oh, mashallah, such a good speaker. No, I'm talking about, are their thoughts logical, sequential? Does it unify the intellect and the spirit? Are their responses and their teachings sound and really feels aligned with what you understand to be the divine principles of God? Lastly, lesson number 3 is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself and Jesus and Buddha and all the other, leaders of world religious communities. You don't find that how they treated people, even when they committed blatant sins, whether it was adultery or this or that, you don't find them being extremely harsh and cruel, right? You find them being wise and merciful and embracing, which helps those people who follow them find more certainty in their message and in their role as prophets or guides or whatever you want to call it. So what about us when we have people in authority who actually push people away, who are more judgmental, more critical than inviting and embracing? And guess what, brothers and sisters out there, our issues are the same as everybody else. Just because you're Muslim or Christian or whatever religion you are, doesn't mean you have the special force field from the human existential struggles. There's going to be drug issues, there's going to be sexuality issues, there's going to be deviation issues, crime, lying, this, that, theft, you name it. It's happening everywhere. As long as you're human, you have folly. And you could certainly fall into those sins. So I think it's a really important reminder for us. And that was a memory I had from a previous Ramadan. And of course, every Ramadan we are trying to reflect, we're trying to grow, we are trying to overcome the shadow and the flaws in our own character by purifying ourselves from our attachments, by putting the spirit forward and pushing the needs of the body back. And I hope this was a good reflection for us. I certainly am still learning from this. And thanks for listening. And I will catch you next time on Coffee with Karim.